Good evening. Just yesterday, the United States Supreme Court reinstituted the death penalty in several states, including Florida. With us tonight on Montage is Attorney General Robert Shevin of Florida. Welcome to Montage.
Good evening.
I don't know whether to feel, well, I don't know how to feel about this issue. It's a great news story, of course, but it involves a very, very critical issue, obviously. How do you feel about it?
Well, of course, I'm an advocate. I argued the case, which we just won yesterday, before the United States Supreme Court, and I was arguing for the reinstitution of the death penalty and for the constitutionality of the law. And while I may have some mixed emotions on the subject, because you are involved with human life, yes, but by the same token, I think the easiest thing to bring us back to earth on what we're talking about is to take a look at the dossiers on these people, take a look at the crimes they've committed and the violence involved and the kinds of senseless killings that are involved, and then we feel, well, you know, this isn't really so bad. This is something that's necessary in order to deter others from committing these kinds of crimes.
I think for some perspective, in just a few moments, we're going to show a report we had earlier in the year of Charles Prophet, who is on death row now. Mm-hmm. Very briefly, tell us why Charles Prophet is sentenced to death.
Well, Charles Prophet broke into an apartment house one evening in Tampa. There's mixed information as to whether he did it to commit a burglary, whether he went there to steal something within the apartment, or whether he went there to kill, because he told a psychiatrist later that he had a desire to kill. He wanted to see how it was to kill somebody. He wanted to see how it felt. He went in the first apartment door he could find. The young man that was sleeping there was a wrestling coach in a high school in Tampa, woke up, was startled, of course, and received a butcher knife in his chest about 5-6 inches deep. Prophet also attacked the woman who was in the bed, who was the wife of the man that he had just killed. Subsequently, when Prophet was in prison in Tampa, or in jail, he told a psychiatrist, "You better move me because I feel that same urge to kill coming on me again." Now, he was deemed to be sane. He was deemed to be competent to stand trial. And the question is, what do you do with somebody who has an uncontrollable urge to kill? If he's put back into society, or even in a prison setting, he could kill again. He could kill an inmate, he could kill a prison guard, he could escape, he could get parole, and these are the kinds of problems that we have to grapple with, and this is the reason, obviously, the jury recommended death, the judge imposed death, the Florida Supreme Court upheld death, and now the United States Supreme Court has upheld death in the Prophet case.
All right, well, in the Prophet case, as I mentioned earlier, we'd like to show you a film report now that Montage presented to you in April on this very issue. And the man, of course, we've just spoken about, who the Florida case was about, was Charles Prophet. Was interviewed on death row by Nancy Solomon, and in fact, Attorney General Shevin presented some of his arguments on that show. Now, hear both sides of the case as we saw them then in April.
Let me tell you something. How do you think it would feel to sit in that chair and have somebody throw juice? There has been nobody to survive that chair to give a description of how it feels. And I've got to tell you, it doesn't, I would imagine it just doesn't tickle.
Charles Prophet is on death row at Florida State Prison in Stark for murdering a Tampa man while burglarizing the man's home. Florida Attorney General Robert Shevin argued before the U.S. Supreme Court this week that the state should be allowed to put Prophet to death. Prophet was convicted by a jury and, as in all capital cases, was granted an appeal of that conviction. Despite that, Prophet insists he is innocent, claiming he did not receive a fair trial because he feels the law discriminates against people who are poor or black.
You go up on that death row right now and you look at their records. Find out how many had PDs and how many had private attorneys. 95% of the men that's on that death row had public defenders. The other 5%, no, there was about 2% that had private attorneys, and the rest were court-appointed attorneys. And none of them has any means. You know, none of them. You won't find any man up there that has means.
Of the 66 people on death row, 35 of them happen to be white, and 31 of them happen to be black. So we really have a majority of white people on death row, not 85% black people on death row. Of the 66 people on death row, approximately 50% retain their own lawyer, were not among the very poor, but had sufficient funds to hire their own competent counsel. And about 50% had court-appointed counsel.
So definitely the public defenders aren't experienced enough in the courtroom. And in order to get a good attorney to defend you in a case like that, you would have to have a minimum of about $35,000. And who's got $35,000? I'm lucky if I can scrape up a couple hundred.
Considering arguments similar to those presented by Prophet in 1972, the Supreme Court, in declaring the then existing death penalty law unconstitutional, said it discriminated in a freakish and whimsical manner against certain people, usually the poor and the black. This is not, however, the key argument in evaluating capital punishment's effectiveness in preventing crime. Some of the most heated debate on the subject focuses on the death penalty as a deterrent to brutal crime.
Wherever I went, I found district attorneys who could tell you about some horrible crime in which the perpetrator of the crime had spared the victim's life because he feared capital punishment. So I do believe that capital punishment is a deterrent to some people and prevents some people from committing murder.
I mean, both penalties deter people from committing crime, but I don't think capital punishment is any greater deterrent than life imprisonment is.
Because when I went through death row recently, I was impressed by the fact that one of the inmates told me, I don't want to keep waking up every morning worrying about whether I'm going to go to the electric chair. It's a frightening feeling. It's very disturbing.
A lot of mornings you wake up, you don't realize where you're at, you know, and you get mad. Sometimes it's very hard to accept that that's what's happening is happening.
Well, if he's concerned about going to the electric chair now in prison, I think he might also have been concerned about it outside before he committed murder, had he known that the electric chair was a viable tool that could be used against him.
I think anyone that commits a crime doesn't think they're going to get caught, for one thing, or else they wouldn't commit the crimes. If they committed a crime and knew that they were going to get caught for it, I mean, they wouldn't. It wouldn't be done. I don't think capital punishment has ever been a deterrent to crime. I imagine, though, you know, a lot of people think so, or else we wouldn't be here. But I don't think it has. It's never been proven.
There are no conclusive studies in Florida that state without doubt that capital punishment is a deterrent to committing crime. But there are figures that show the number of homicides and murders within given years, and Attorney General Shevin uses these statistics as concrete evidence for advocating the death penalty.
For 10 years after 1964, up until 1974, when we really didn't use the death penalty as an effective law enforcement tool, the homicide rate, the murder rate, jumped from about 7,000 to 9,000 a year up to more than 21,000 murders a year nationwide.
Not all of the pros and cons concerning the debate on capital punishment can be measured statistically. Many people question the morality of taking a person's life, while others seek retribution, an eye for an eye. What must be decided is in which way is justice best served.
There are so many crimes: the assassination of a president, the blowing up of an airliner to collect insurance on a man's mother's life, and killing 37 people in the process. That happened in Colorado. Blowing up buildings by terrorists, kidnapping of children and other people for ransom, and then killing the victims. There are so many senseless, needless crimes that must be punished by people realizing that if they commit these crimes, they're going to forfeit their own life. And I think that society has a right to demand the death penalty in those situations.
In our society today, we are so geared to saving life and stuff. We're supposed to be so civilized when just about half the countries in the world that are behind us economically and well, society-wise, have abandoned it. They know it's not a deterrent.
My strong feeling is that if there is an alternative short of death, which will accomplish the same results, any morally sensitive civilization should choose that alternative. And consequently, I'm against capital punishment for that reason. I don't think it accomplishes any legitimate public objective that cannot be accomplished by life imprisonment.
An alternative to capital punishment is life in prison, and advocates of this philosophy claim the criminal would no longer be a burden to society, and yet his life would be spared. Well, that argument is usually countered by those believing we're spending too much money on incarcerating those prisoners. As the Florida law now stands, without the death penalty being instituted, a person convicted and sentenced to life must spend at least the minimum 25 years in prison without parole.
Many times he's sentenced to life and he's out in 7, 8 years.
Yes, but for first-degree murder and for rape of a child under 11, if you're convicted of those two crimes, which are capital crimes, and are not sentenced to death but sentenced to life, you're not eligible for any parole consideration for 25 years.
That's positive.
Yes.
There's no
That's right.
going back on that.
No, that's unlike any other crime.
Right.
Any other crime, you're eligible immediately.
In addition, if you eliminate capital punishment and you provide life imprisonment as the punishment for murder, what is to prevent people who are convicted of first-degree murder, sentenced to life imprisonment, from killing guards or other prison personnel in an attempt to escape, since they'll have nothing to lose? They've already received a life sentence. They can only receive another life sentence. It's worth the gamble to them to kill someone in an attempt to escape.
If the punishment for rape is life imprisonment, the punishment for murder is life imprisonment, if the punishment for robbery is life imprisonment, and the punishment for murder is life imprisonment, then he may very well feel that he may as well eliminate the eyewitnesses, because he stands less chance of ever being caught. Whereas if there is a greater punishment for murder, if he thinks that by committing murder I'm going to get the electric chair, or committing murder in a rape case I'm going to get the electric chair, whereas otherwise if I get caught I'm only going to get life imprisonment, I think it could go a long way towards deterring the rapist and the robber from committing murder.
It's just as tragic, or virtually just as tragic, if someone is wrongfully sentenced to life imprisonment who is actually innocent. So this is, of course, one of the potential shortcomings of any system of justice. And there's nothing you can do to have a perfect system. We can't achieve a utopian society.
The leading argument against the use of capital punishment is that new evidence which could prove a defendant not guilty will be found and brought before the court at a later time. That's something the electric chair can't wait for. Those arguing this philosophy cite the recent findings in the murder trial of Freddie Pitts and Wilbert Lee. The two men were on Florida's death row until 1972 and then sentenced to life in prison when the Supreme Court struck down the death penalty law that year. But just last September, new evidence was found to clear Pitts and Lee, and they consequently were freed.
Let's say the death penalty was still in effect when they were on death row and they were still executing people. All right? And them men were sentenced to die, and they died in that electric chair. And all of a sudden, this year or last year when they finally left, they found out that they didn't do it. There's two men who died and didn't commit the crime. Now, how the hell are you going to tell them families that, look, we're sorry, it was an accident, but it happens?
Out of the hundreds of thousands of trials in the United States, this rarely happens, plus the appeal rights that are given to persons who are convicted of capital crimes. In addition to that, we supply them with top-flight lawyers.
If they would kill a man, okay, find out later that he's innocent, and then get the man who really did it, I wonder if they should kill him or not. Because actually that man's responsible for two murders, when you come right down to it. I don't know. That's a question I've been pondering in my mind.
The Supreme Court has heard both sides of the capital punishment debate. Their decision on whether Florida's death penalty law is constitutional is expected in the early summer. When the Supreme Court struck down its existing death penalty law in 1972, it was by a 5-4 margin. The swing vote this time could come from Ford appointee to the High Court, John Paul Stevens.
Just wish I knew more about that man up there. That's up there now, knowing what's going through his mind. You don't know. It's taken a long time for it to get to this point, you know, but now that it's here, you wish it stall a while, just stall a while.
The court is divided just like the country is. And I think the court reflects in a large part what the country's misgivings about the death penalty are, how it's really not a clear-cut moral issue.
Both these men use a gradual hair color. One uses the leading brand, the other uses youth hair.
Gee, they both look great.
But which one smells best?
Smells best? This one for sure.
Right. He uses youth hair. Youth hair gets rid of the gray gradually, and independent testing among women proves youth hair smells better. Use youth hair. They'll never tell by the look or the smell.
Planning another quiet weekend at home with the kids?
Ask your mother, she's mechanical.
May we offer you the opportunity to reconsider and come to the Boca Raton Hotel and Club instead. We'll put you up in separate rooms with no charge for the kids. And we'll keep them and you so busy, you won't see them until their bedtime. Come to the Boca Raton Hotel and Club and spend a great, inexpensive weekend with your kids without your kids.
You pull out on Florida's Turnpike in your Ford Pinto Pony with more horsepower than Chevette or Datsun 210 or Toyota Corolla. You pull up to the Palm Bay Club in your Ford Granada, looking like you paid 3 times as much for a Mercedes. You take off to the Keys in your Ford LTD with a special tow package to haul 7,000 pounds of Florida fun. We've got your car, South Florida, at your Big Ten Ford dealers.
Throw away that old-fashioned flea collar. Get the ultimate killer of fleas and ticks. Odor-free flea and tick concentrate from Holiday. Just add a tablespoon to a quart of water, sponge it on. Zap. All fleas and ticks dead in minutes. Keeps on killing. No odor, no irritation. It's crystal clear. Use it on dogs, cats, kittens, and puppies. Odor-free from Holiday. Kills fleas and ticks. Replace that flea collar with something that really works.
Well, as we said earlier, that was the view of death row and some people on it in April. And tonight, live with us in our studio is Attorney General Robert Shevin. General Shevin, how soon will someone literally be executed in Florida?
Joe, I think the soonest would be about 6 months because, number one, the court has allowed for petitions for rehearing, and that has to be disposed of. I would assume that might take 30, 60 days. Then after that, we have to have the entire file shipped to the governor. The governor has to review it. Now, he could be reviewing it in the interim, and we may be able to cut some of the time off the process. The governor does have to make an independent review of the file. The governor has the right to grant a reprieve of up to 60 days. If he feels that a case deserves commutation of sentence from death to life, he can't do it alone in Florida. He has to have 3 cabinet members vote with him. I really would doubt seriously, unless it's an exceptional case, I would doubt seriously coming back as we do to capital punishment that there's going to be very much commutation at the pardon board level, so to speak. I just don't think that's going to happen in Florida.
Now, I understand Prophet, the man we just saw, may be the first to be executed. Is that
I think
probable?
Certainly his case having been disposed of first, the Supreme Court of the United States having affirmed the death sentence in the Prophet case, that more than likely that could be the first case in which the penalty is actually imposed.
I'm curious personally, if you had not been for the death penalty, as the Attorney General of Florida, would you have been legally obligated to argue for it, even though personally...
If I had a personal concern or predilection against it, I think I would still have a responsibility to defend the law, but I don't. I personally view it as being a necessary ingredient in the criminal justice system. I don't see capital punishment as a cure-all. It's not a panacea. It's not going to solve all our problems overnight, but I think it's going to do several important things. I do think it'll serve as a deterrent. I think it'll serve as a specific deterrent to the individual against whom it's imposed, because there are people who are so violent by their nature that they will kill again unless society can handle that case, unless society can do something. And life imprisonment is not an acceptable alternative, because there have been many cases of people in prison who kill prison guards, who kill inmates, people who escape and then kill, people who get parole and then kill. So I don't see life imprisonment as being the answer in all cases. Also, it's a general deterrent. I think it does say to society and to the criminal element that if you kill, you stand the risk of being put in the electric chair. And they are frightened of the electric chair. They're scared. They're very scared of the electric chair. And I think that fear would carry through on the outside as well as inside the prison walls.
Well, then, as a deterrent, what would you think of public executions?
Well, you can view it 2 ways. You can say, okay, let's put it in the public, let's make sure everybody sees it and understands it, and let's drive that point home. But I don't know that we need to glorify executions. I don't know that we need to publicize them and glorify them in order for them to do some good. You know, not many of us would like to view surgery. I'm not the kind of guy that would like to go in and watch an operation. I don't know whether you would, but surgery would bother me. Well, perhaps seeing an execution might affect me the same way. But surgery is necessary. Surgery is a vital and necessary and important ingredient in our system. It does a lot of good. Well, I think executions, whether they're inside the surgical room where it is only viewed by the doctors and by the people that are involved in the surgical procedure, or whether it's outside in public view, I think it still has some benefits. You know, besides the deterrent effect, Joe, I think that the executions, I think the imposition of the death penalty is important from a retribution standpoint. I think society needs to know that people get what they deserve when they commit violent crimes. If they don't get what they deserve, then that's the beginning of lynch law, of anarchy, of vigilante justice. And to avoid that, I think we've got to have some form of retribution. The Nazi warlords, we didn't try and execute the Nazi warlords because of deterrence. They were executed primarily because of retribution. So again, surgery is an important and vital aspect of society. It's done inside a closed room. It's not done in a public square. By the same token, I don't think it's necessary to have executions in a public square.
However, deterrence is the main reason for instituting, as far as you're
I would
concerned.
think it's the main reason, yes, and particularly dealing with rapes, robberies, and burglaries. We would hope that a rapist, a robber, a burglar would not say, I may as well eliminate the eyewitnesses and avoid being apprehended because it doesn't make any difference. We would hope that he would think, well, it is going to make a difference. I might go to the chair if I kill, so I'm going to leave them alive. I think there's an incentive now to wipe out the witnesses. I think with the death penalty being used and viable, there would be an incentive to leave the witnesses alive.
Nevertheless, aren't most murders committed in moments of passion between people who know each other?
A great number of them are,
Now,
Joe.
in those cases, the death penalty
Yes,
have no effect.
I would tend to agree with you that in those cases, in heat of passion crimes, it'll have very, very little effect, if any. But about 40% of the murders are committed during other crimes, rapes, robberies, and burglaries, and that 40% is where I think it will have some impact.
Now, let's say we go down the road 2 or 3 years and we have executions and the murder rate does not go down. Would you be for doing away with the death penalty again?
Well, I think if it could be demonstrated at that point that it had absolutely no positive impact, then I would have to view it as a real possibility that we might want to go back to saying no death penalty. However, you've got to obviously consider what other factors are present, the kinds of crimes, under what circumstances they were committed, and whether or not all other crimes went up accordingly or whether they went down. I think you have to really examine the thing. All I know is that the murder rate stayed pretty steady for a long time in America, and it just jumped dramatically over the past 10 years from, say, 7,000 to 8,000 murders a year up to 22,000 murders. Well, that's an awful lot of innocent people. You know, the difference of maybe from 8,000 murders to 22,000 murders, you've got 12 to 14,000 people a year being killed more since we haven't had a death penalty than before. Now, I think that demonstrates to me that the death penalty hopefully will help bring that down.
Now, do you feel that the death penalty will now be in effect for a number of years? We have, of course, in legal terms, stare decisis, meaning that the decisions stand for a time so that there's some continuity of the law. However, 72 was ruled unconstitutional, 76 now it's ruled constitutional. What's next?
Well, we have to look at what happened in 72. You know, for many, many years up to 72, the court said the death penalty is not cruel and unusual punishment, it's constitutional. Then in 72, you had a badly split court, 5-4, and they said as it's being applied, it's unconstitutional. And everybody assumed, well, that means they're probably about ready to throw it out, period. Well, all of a sudden yesterday, we saw not just a 5-4 decision. It was interesting. Mr. Prophet was saying he was wondering what Stevens was thinking, the new justice. Well, it wasn't just Stevens. We actually got 7 votes out of the 9 to affirm the Florida law and to hold it constitutional. And that is a substantial number of people on the court. And I think the court has had to rethink the whole issue because of the tremendous amount of violence that's occurred over the past 3 years.
I was interested to read in the Supreme Court decision, as it's been reported in the press, that the court said it was important to follow what they thought the American people wanted, and they thought the American people wanted the death penalty. Now, how about busing? I'm sorry to throw you that loaded grenade.
No, that's an interesting observation.
It seems they've opened the door to...
Of course, from a legal standpoint, the reason that they differentiate the two is that in the capital punishment area, they're saying, in effect, that it might be cruel and unusual punishment if evolving standards of decency in a maturing society have made it an unacceptable mode of punishment. And what they say to answer that is, obviously evolving standards of decency has not made it an unacceptable punishment because the American public and public opinion polls support it, because they've approved it at the polls in 5 elections, and because 36 states have readopted it through their legislative bodies.
Do you get a feeling from people that they're for this?
Oh, yes. I think that probably a good 70 to 75% of the public are for the death penalty in limited circumstances. I don't think anybody's suggesting we go out and put everybody in the electric chair who commits any kind of crime. I just think the most violent heinous kinds of murders are the ones that ought to be treated with the electric chair as a punishment.
Now, I'm just curious, as the chief law enforcement officer in the state, will you have to be present at executions?
I don't have to be present. I assume that I could if I wanted to, and we get back to the other question. I mean, is it necessary, really, for me to be present to recognize that this is a necessary and vital part of our system?
Right. General Shevin, thank you very
Thank you,
much for
Joe.
being with us. We'll be right back.